Love? Or was it a trap? It wasn't just a love story. It was a story of deceptive hope. Linda Curry seemed to have the kind of life many could only dream of: a thriving career at Southern California Edison, a cozy home in sunny California, and friends who adored her. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and instantly become its center. Tall, elegant, and with impeccable taste, Linda always knew what she wanted. Yet, there was one longing that remained unfulfilled: to find a love that would last a lifetime. When Linda met Paul Curry, it seemed as though fate had finally smiled upon her. Paul was the complete opposite of the men she had been with before. He wasn't tall or athletic like her second husband. His appearance was unremarkable: short, glasses, and a slightly hesitant smile. But it wasn't his looks that captivated her. It was his mind. Paul had an answer for everything. He was the kind of man who could effortlessly quote Shakespeare one moment and break down nuclear physics the next. His intellect was magnetic, and Linda was completely drawn in. He wasn't just smart, he was a genius, and everyone said so. His appearance on Jeopardy, where he walked away with a significant cash prize, was practically legendary among his colleagues. Membership in Mensa, the elite society for those with the highest IQs, was Paul's pride and joy. He loved to share this detail with anyone who would listen, often with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. But Linda wasn't bothered by it. She told her friends, "I've finally found someone who's on the same wavelength as me." Linda's friends didn't share her optimism. Mary Siebold, a close confidant, was skeptical of Paul from the very beginning. "He seemed too good to be true," she later recalled. At parties, Paul would show up and steer conversations in a way that highlighted his intellect. He always seemed eager to demonstrate his superiority. "He came across as someone who knew everything and was always right," said his colleagues. But Linda only saw the best in him. Paul had a way with words, always knowing exactly what to say. He read her poetry, shared his dreams, and painted vivid pictures of their future together. He talked about building their dream home, starting a family, and growing old side by side. "I've never met someone so intelligent and caring," Linda would tell her friends. She truly believed their life together would be a fairy tale. But Paul was not the man he appeared to be. His smile concealed a cold, calculated mind, and his promises were part of a meticulously crafted plan. Linda had no idea that behind the mask of a genius lay a man who wielded his intellect as a weapon. Paul was a master manipulator. He had an uncanny ability to say exactly what people wanted to hear. And Linda? She was the perfect target, trusting, kind, and eager to believe in the love she thought she had found. When Paul proposed to Linda, she didn't hesitate. They made their way to Las Vegas, where they exchanged vows in a small chapel. It was a quiet, modest day, nothing like the grand wedding Linda had once envisioned for herself. But she was happy. In her heart, she believed that with this man, a bright and beautiful future awaited her. From the very beginning of their marriage, Paul took control of everything. He offered solutions that seemed meticulously thought out in advance. "You should get a life insurance policy. It's the smart thing to do," he suggested one day. Linda simply nodded, unaware of how her life was slowly slipping into his hands. If Linda had paid attention to the warning signs, she might have realized that her new love was more like a cage, one with no way out. But she trusted Paul. He was her husband, her partner, her genius. It never crossed her mind that this man could become the source of her greatest nightmare. When Linda Curry returned home after their brief wedding ceremony in Las Vegas, she was filled with hope. The house was bathed in sunlight, the furniture gleamed with perfection, and Paul greeted her with a smile that seemed to say, "Everything will be perfect now." But if Linda had been able to look beyond that smile, she would have seen the cold calculation hiding just beneath the surface. Paul wasted no time in setting his rules. One of his first moves was suggesting a sizable life insurance policy on Linda. "It's the smart thing to do," he explained, framing it as a way to secure their future. Linda, accustomed to trusting her husband, saw nothing suspicious at first. But when her friend Mary Siebold learned about the policy, she was stunned. "Are you serious? Why on earth would you agree to that?" Mary exclaimed, alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Have you completely lost your mind? Why is he so insistent on this?" Mary demanded, her voice sharp with concern. But Linda only laughed it off. "He's just looking out for me," she replied with a smile, brushing aside her friend's worries. Paul was relentless. He knew exactly how to persuade Linda that his decisions were what was best for their family. She signed the paperwork, never suspecting that she had just become a key piece in his carefully laid plan. But soon, oddities began to surface. Paul, who always played the role of the devoted husband, seemed almost obsessively focused on details. Every night, he prepared dinners with meticulous attention to detail, carefully selecting the ingredients. He insisted that Linda try his special salad dressings, which he crafted with pride. "It's my secret recipe," he would say, adding something to their meals with a subtle air of mystery. At times, his care felt almost overbearing, as if it wasn't just love driving his actions, but something else entirely. He would draw her bubble baths, setting the stage for an atmosphere of warmth and comfort, yet it all felt strangely like a theatrical performance. Linda even joked with her friends. "Paul gives me a spa night every evening. Maybe I hit the jackpot with this husband." Her laughter was light, but to those who knew her well, there was an undercurrent of something they couldn't quite place, something just slightly off. But behind the curtain of this carefully staged performance, warning signs began to emerge. Paul often disappeared for hours, claiming he had work to do. Linda, engrossed in her own career, didn't notice how he was slowly isolating her from her friends. "You're overworking yourself. You should rest more at home," he would say, gently persuading her to skip their outings. It was just another thread in the web he was weaving, tightening his grip on her life bit by bit. Linda began to feel increasingly fatigued. At first, she chalked it up to stress from work. "It's just a phase," she reassured herself. "Everything will get better." But her condition only worsened. Headaches, weakness, and a loss of appetite became her new normal. Her friends started to notice the changes. "She looked drained," a colleague later recalled. Yet Paul played the role of the devoted husband flawlessly. He was always by her side, expressing concern, offering support, and making sure everyone saw just how attentive he was. It was a performance that left little room for suspicion, at least for a while. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, holding her hand and promising that everything would be all right. "You'll get better, I know it," he assured her, adding yet another brushstroke to the portrait of the perfect partner. Even the doctors couldn't figure out what was happening to Linda. Her tests came back normal, yet she continued to grow weaker. One evening, when Mary came over for a visit, Linda confided in her. "I feel like something's really wrong with me, but Paul takes such good care of me, I don't even know how to bring it up to him." Mary sat silently, listening, while an inner turmoil raged within her. She wanted to tell Linda to leave, to run, but she held back, unsure if her words would reach through the haze of Linda's trust in Paul. The situation grew increasingly tense. Paul's care seemed almost too perfect, too calculated. He resembled an actor who couldn't break character, constantly performing his role as the devoted husband. Yet Linda continued to believe in him. "He just wants me to feel better," she would insist to her friends, brushing off their growing concerns. If only Linda had known what was happening behind her back. Paul meticulously planned every move. His care wasn't genuine. It was calculated. He knew time was running out, and he needed to act quickly to ensure his plan didn't fall apart. These warning signs went unnoticed. Linda continued to trust Paul, unaware that he was already preparing for the next stage of his twisted game, a game where the stakes were her very life. By 1993, Linda Curry's condition had become a cause for serious concern. Her friends and colleagues watched in dismay as the once vibrant and energetic woman seemed to wither before their eyes. Linda complained of constant fatigue, dizziness, and nausea. Her usual ease in conversation was replaced with a noticeable withdrawal, and the cheerful glow that once lit up her face had dimmed to a haunting shadow. She sought help from doctors, but they were at a loss. Her tests revealed nothing, yet her symptoms only grew worse. Linda began spending more and more time at home, turning down invitations from friends. To those around her, Paul appeared to be the picture of a devoted husband. He accompanied her to appointments, held her hand in hospital rooms, and prepared special meals just for her. "He's trying so hard to make me feel better," she would say. But her friends couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unsettling about his efforts, something they couldn't quite put into words. One of the first red flags was Paul's determination to take complete control. He personally scheduled Linda's doctor appointments, decided which medications she should take, and insisted she only eat meals he prepared. His kinder special. Salad dressings became a running joke among her friends. "Is he a chef or a scientist?" Mary Seibold would laugh. But soon, the jokes gave way to a growing unease. There was something about Paul's behavior that no longer seemed endearing. It felt calculated. "Every time I visited Linda, she looked worse than before," Mary recalled. "I started to think it had something to do with Paul. There was just something off about him." But Linda refused to hear anything negative about her husband. "He's doing everything he can to help me get better," she would insist, dismissing any concerns her friends raised. But one day, something happened in the hospital that could no longer be ignored. Linda had been hospitalized after yet another bout of debilitating weakness. A nurse, monitoring her condition, noticed something unusual about the IV bag connected to Linda. It appeared cloudy. This was so out of the ordinary that the nurse immediately reported it, and the bag was sent off for analysis. The results shocked everyone. The IV bag contained lidocaine, a substance that could have caused Linda's worsening condition. Doctors and nurses immediately reported the findings to the police. Paul became the prime suspect, but investigators lacked enough evidence to charge him. He denied any involvement, maintaining his innocence. Even with the damning results of the analysis, Linda continued to trust her husband. "It could have been just an accident," she said, defending him with unwavering loyalty. Linda's friends were convinced that Paul had something to do with her condition. "Every time he's around, she gets worse," Mary insisted, but she refuses to see it. Her colleague and close friend, Frankie Thorber, suggested moving in with Linda temporarily to figure out what was going on. Frankie kept a close watch on Paul, but he behaved flawlessly. He was caring, attentive, and loving, Frankie later recalled. "I didn't see anything suspicious at all." But then Frankie noticed something strange. Paul often spent time alone with Linda during the moments when her condition suddenly worsened. This deepened her suspicions, but there was no concrete evidence to confirm them. "I tried talking to Linda, but she just brushed it off," Mary recalled. Her love for him was stronger than her fear. Meanwhile, Paul continued to play his part flawlessly. He began actively studying chemical compounds, claiming it was to better understand how to help Linda. He spent long hours online, purchased books on pharmacology, and even consulted with doctors. However, he only shared his knowledge superficially, as though he were deliberately hiding his true intentions. There was a calculated air about his actions, one that hinted at far more than simple concern for his wife. Linda, already worn down by her illness, continued to trust Paul. She refused to believe that the man who cared for her every day could wish her harm. "He's saving me," she would tell her friends. But those words rang increasingly hollow against the backdrop of her worsening condition. Each time she spoke them, her friends grew more certain that something wasn't right. Soon Linda was hospitalized again, this time with even more severe symptoms. Her body seemed to be giving up, yet doctors still couldn't identify the cause. As always, Paul was by her side, putting on his usual performance of concern and devotion. But Linda's friends weren't fooled. They knew something was terribly wrong. "If she doesn't leave him soon," Mary whispered to Frankie, "this will end in tragedy." When Linda was discharged from the hospital, her friend Mary visited her at home and stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. On the dresser in Linda's bedroom lay a stack of documents. Among them were life insurance policies in Linda's name, with Paul listed as the beneficiary. "Why are these papers out?" Mary asked. "Did you take them out yourself?" Linda looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't touch them," she replied. At that moment, Mary realized something was seriously wrong. Paul wasn't just hiding something, he was orchestrating it. But even after seeing those documents, Linda continued to defend her husband. "He's just taking care of our future," she insisted, her voice filled with unwavering trust. Her friends, frustrated and heartbroken, began to pull away. They couldn't bear to watch as Linda slowly withered, trapped in a situation that seemed to have no escape. These warning signs, the mysterious IV bags, the hidden insurance policies, Linda's deteriorating health, were forming a picture she refused to see. Paul Curry, her husband and supposed savior, was becoming increasingly suspicious. Yet Linda, blinded by trust and love, wasn't ready to face the truth. Her friends could only stand by helplessly, watching as the clock on her life ticked closer and closer to zero. June 9, 1994, was supposed to be an ordinary evening in the home of Linda and Paul Curry in San Clemente, California. But on this day, fate took its final irreversible step. What began as a romantic love story ended in a tragedy that Linda's friends still struggle to come to terms with to this day. Linda was feeling worse than ever. Her skin was pale, her movements sluggish, and her voice barely audible. Paul, as always, was in the kitchen, preparing dinner and lovingly offering her favorite meal. "You look so tired. How about a bath? I'll draw you some hot water with bubbles," he said with a disarming smile. Barely able to stand, Linda agreed. It had become their ritual, Paul always ensuring her comfort. Yet now, this care felt less like devotion and more like something deeply unsettling.
Later, Linda went upstairs and lay down in the bedroom. Before long, she drifted off to sleep, completely unaware that behind the calm and comforting facade lurked a deadly threat.
According to Paul, he woke around midnight to find Linda unconscious. In a panic, he called 911, reporting that his wife wasn't breathing. "I've tried performing CPR, but it's not working," he told the operator, his voice a mix of alarm and unsettling composure. When paramedics arrived, they found Linda lying motionless in bed. Her body was already cold, and there was no pulse. Despite their best efforts to revive her, it was too late. Within the hour, Linda was pronounced dead. Linda's death immediately raised suspicions. Her friends and colleagues, upon hearing the news, were shocked, but not surprised. "I knew this would happen," her friend Mary recalled bitterly. "I told her to leave him, but she wouldn't listen." When the doctors conducted the autopsy, they discovered something highly unusual. Linda's body contained an enormous amount of nicotine, enough to kill several people. This shocking revelation was even more baffling given that Linda had never smoked a day in her life. How could such a lethal dose of poison have entered her system? Even more questions arose when a puncture mark was found behind her ear. Medical experts concluded that the nicotine had most likely been administered through an injection. But who could have done this? And more importantly, why? Paul behaved exactly as one might expect from a grieving husband. He stood near Linda's body, repeatedly saying, "I can't believe she's gone." However, his emotions felt almost too rehearsed. Linda's friends later recalled how oddly composed he seemed that evening when he informed them of her death. Something about his demeanor didn't sit right. After Linda's death, Paul wasted no time handling the paperwork. He collected approximately $419,000 in insurance payouts and pension benefits. He abandoned her home, filled with memories, and quickly left town. His actions only deepened the suspicions of Linda's friends and colleagues. It was as if he just turned the page and started a new chapter, like nothing had happened, Mary recalled. The police launched an investigation, but they quickly ran into a lack of solid evidence. There were no direct links tying Paul to the crime. His portrayal of a devoted husband had been so convincing that even medical experts couldn't definitively prove his involvement in Linda's death. But Linda's friends refused to give up. They insisted that Paul was the only person with her on the night she died. "This can't be a coincidence," said Frankie Thorber. Linda didn't smoke. She didn't take anything unusual. The only person who could have done this is Paul. The most chilling part of this story is how long Linda refused to see the truth. Even as her friends warned her, she continued to defend her husband. "He loves me," she would say. "He takes care of me." Perhaps she simply couldn't bear to admit that the man she trusted with her life might have been plotting her death all along. On that fateful night, Linda Curry became the victim of a plan that had been years in the making. Her death was the final link in a chain of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. But it was only the first step in what would become a long and arduous journey toward justice. From the very beginning of their relationship, Paul Curry seemed like a caring and attentive husband. But behind the facade of love and devotion lay cold calculation. His sole objective was money, and Linda's death was a meticulously planned step toward his fortune. When Linda and Paul married, their combined income was approximately $140,000 a year, a substantial amount for the 1990s. Linda, a successful career woman, had built up significant savings, owned a beautiful home in San Clemente, and possessed assets that could secure a comfortable life. Paul, on the other hand, had almost nothing. No meaningful savings, no property, and not even a stable career. But what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in his ability to present himself in the best possible light. Paul insisted that Linda take out multiple life insurance policies, all naming him as the primary beneficiary. Altogether, these policies promised a payout of around $1 million. He said it was a sensible step to secure our future, Linda told her friends. But her friend Mary Siebold immediately saw a hidden motive behind this seemingly practical suggestion. "I told her, 'Are you out of your mind? Why is he so insistent on this?'" Mary recalled. But Linda just laughed, confident that her husband simply wanted to take care of her. Paul planned everything down to the smallest detail. He knew perfectly well that Linda trusted him implicitly. Her home, her accounts, her future, all were gradually becoming part of his calculated scheme. But Linda's friends saw what she refused to acknowledge. "He brought nothing to this marriage," Frankie Thorber said. "Linda had it all, a home, a stable income, and he had nothing but his stories and a fake smile." The life insurance policies were the cornerstone of Paul's plan. He meticulously studied every detail, ensuring that in the event of Linda's death, the money would go directly to him. And it worked. After her death, Paul collected $419,000 in insurance payouts and gained access to her retirement savings. Additionally, he began receiving monthly pension payments of $564. However, it wasn't enough. Paul had counted on the full $1 million. But to his shock, it was revealed that Linda had changed her will, leaving half of her assets to her sister. This revelation was a significant blow to Paul. He called me in a rage, trying to figure out why her sister got part of the money, Mary recalled. He couldn't understand how this had happened. After Linda's death, Paul quickly sold her beloved home. This house had been her pride, a sanctuary where she felt happy and secure. But to Paul, it was nothing more than another asset to be converted into cash. He let the house fall into disrepair and then sold it for a fraction of its value, Frankie recounted. This callous act only reinforced Linda's friend's suspicions that Paul had never truly loved her. Paul Curry was a master manipulator. He knew exactly how to speak and act to appear caring and sincere, yet his sole objective was always money. After Linda's death, he moved to Las Vegas, attempting to start a new life. He found work as a used car salesman and later became a building inspector. Even in his new life, Paul continued to conceal his dark past, keeping his true self hidden behind a carefully constructed facade. He thought he had fooled everyone, one of his former colleagues recalled. He was certain no one could ever connect him to what happened. And for a time, that was true. Paul enjoyed the money he had collected after Linda's death and carried himself with an air of untouchable confidence. The most painful question Linda's friends still ask themselves is, why didn't she leave? Everyone had warned her that Paul wasn't safe, yet she kept defending him. She loved him and believed he loved her too, Mary said. Even as the warning signs grew louder, Linda refused to see the truth. Her trust in Paul blinded her to the danger that ultimately claimed her life. Some believed that Linda feared failure. After 2 divorces, she couldn't bring herself to admit that her third marriage was another mistake. She had invested so much into the relationship and refused to believe that her husband could be so cruel. Her unwavering faith in love became her greatest vulnerability, one that Paul exploited to perfection. Paul Curry spent years meticulously crafting his plan. The intelligence he so proudly flaunted became his weapon for manipulation. He knew exactly how to avoid suspicion, appear genuine, and convince those around him of his innocence. But in the end, it was his greed that became the key to his downfall. Linda's death was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated crime. And though her friends and family continue to mourn her loss, they find solace in knowing that the truth has finally prevailed. After Linda Curry's death, the police launched an investigation, but were met with a frustrating lack of direct evidence. On the surface, Paul Curry appeared to be a grieving husband, devastated by his wife's tragic passing. Doctors had recorded a lethal dose of nicotine in her system, but nothing definitively pointed to Paul's involvement. The case quickly stalled, leaving investigators with unanswered questions and no clear path forward. However, Linda's friends couldn't simply accept this and move on. They were convinced that Paul was the one who had carefully planned and executed her murder for financial gain. But proving it was far more challenging than they had anticipated. Years passed, and Paul Curry went on with his life, enjoying the money he had collected from Linda's insurance policies and pension benefits, all while remaining untouched by the law. In 2002, Linda Curry's case, long considered cold, landed on the desk of Detective Ivan Shaw. Known for her tenacity and sharp eye for details others often missed, Shaw dove into the case with fresh determination. She began by meticulously reviewing every old report and re-examining the evidence, hoping to uncover the key that had eluded investigators for years. One of Shaw's earliest discoveries was a set of audio recordings from interviews police conducted with Linda in 1993, a year before her death. In these recordings, Linda explicitly voiced her suspicions about Paul. "If someone is trying to poison me, it can only be him," she told investigators. These words now rang as a haunting premonition, an unheeded warning that no one had taken seriously at the time. Shaw began re-examining the key pieces of evidence from the case. Her attention was drawn to the injection mark found behind Linda's ear during the autopsy. Experts had concluded that such a mark could only have been left by a syringe used to administer nicotine. This detail stood out. It was highly unusual. Nicotine as a murder weapon was almost unheard of. Determined to unravel how this substance could have been weaponized, Shaw sought out leading nicotine experts to help piece together the mystery. One of these experts was Dr. Neil Benowitz, a leading authority on nicotine from the University of California, San Francisco. When Shaw contacted him, he immediately recalled the case. "This was a level of nicotine I had never seen before," he said. Benowitz explained that such a dose could be fatal within 20 to 30 minutes of administration. This revelation meant that the killer had to be physically near Linda at the exact moment of her death, a critical detail that narrowed the list of possible suspects significantly. Shaw delved deeper into Paul Curry's past and uncovered a web of deceit. Paul had lied about his qualifications, claiming to be an engineer and an expert in nuclear energy. In reality, he didn't even hold a degree. His colleagues described him as an arrogant man who relished boasting about his intelligence, but many had long suspected that his knowledge was shallow at best. This pattern of deception painted a clearer picture of a man who built his life on lies, making him all the more capable of orchestrating a sinister plan. At the same time, Shaw uncovered that Paul had maintained contact with several ex-wives and children, relationships Linda had no idea existed. He had carefully concealed these facts to preserve his image as a successful and dependable husband. But the most revealing discovery was what Paul did after Linda's death. He swiftly moved to another state, cutting all ties with her friends and family. This abrupt relocation and severance from the life he shared with Linda spoke volumes, further solidifying Shaw's suspicions that Paul was hiding far more than anyone had realized. By 2006, Shaw had gathered enough evidence to present the case to Orange County District Attorney Brahim Bayai. Bayai understood the enormity of the challenge ahead. There were no direct pieces of evidence tying Paul to Linda's death, and much of what Shaw had uncovered was circumstantial. Still, Bayai was confident. He believed the pieces of the puzzle were there, waiting to be connected. If he could link the dots and present a coherent narrative, he was determined to bring Paul Curry to justice for Linda's tragic death. Bayai's strongest argument rested on a simple, yet damning fact. On the night of Linda's death, Paul was the only person with her in the house. No one else could have administered the lethal dose of nicotine. Adding to this, Bayai uncovered that Paul had been researching the use of nicotine as a poison well before Linda's death. He had purchased books on toxicology, studied the properties of nicotine, and even consulted with chemists under the guise of academic curiosity. This premeditation painted a chilling picture of a man meticulously planning the murder of his wife, ensuring he left as little evidence as possible. In 2010, Paul Curry was living a quiet life in Kansas. He had remarried, started a family, and taken up a new job as a building inspector. By all appearances, he had successfully left his past behind, confident that no one would connect him to Linda Curry's suspicious death. But his sense of security shattered in November of that year when plainclothes officers arrived at his door. What seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned into a reckoning as the ghosts of his past came knocking. For Paul, the illusion of safety was about to unravel. Yvonne Shar devised a cunning plan to catch Paul Curry off guard. Rather than confronting him outright about suspicions of murder, she introduced herself as a local detective following up on a routine case. Curry, believing he was dealing with an unrelated inquiry, agreed to speak. Unbeknownst to him, every word he said was being carefully recorded, each detail building a trap from which he couldn't escape. It was a masterstroke of strategy, allowing Shar to peel back the layers of Curry's carefully constructed facade. At first, the detectives kept their questions light, deliberately avoiding any hint of suspicion. Paul Curry, seated with an air of casual confidence, responded with ease. "Is this about my late wife, Linda?" he asked, his tone measured and calm. "She passed away years ago. She had some health issues." His voice carried the kind of practiced sincerity that could easily fool someone less prepared. But as the conversation progressed, the detectives began to tighten the screws. Their questions became sharper, each one carefully designed to probe deeper into Curry's memories of that fateful night. The room grew heavier with tension as Paul's initial composure began to show cracks. A slight hesitation in his answers, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Small tells that seasoned investigators like Shar knew to watch for. Without realizing it, Curry was walking straight into their carefully laid trap. When Shaw finally confronted Paul with the accusation of murdering Linda, his once unshakable confidence began to crumble. The man who had always prided himself on being the smartest person in the room now seemed caught off guard, his composure slipping away like sand through his fingers. He stammered, his previously calm and calculated responses devolving into a jumbled mess of half-hearted denials and excuses. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. But every attempt to explain himself only deepened the shadows of suspicion hanging over him. When the words came, clear and final, that he was being arrested for Linda's murder, his face drained of all color. For a moment he was frozen, as if time itself had stopped. Then, with a mix of disbelief and desperation, he blurted out, "You've got to be kidding me." But this was no joke. The man who had spent nearly 2 decades outsmarting everyone around him now found himself outmaneuvered. The weight of his crimes, long hidden behind a mask of charm and intelligence, was finally catching up to him. And for the first time in years, Paul Curry realized he was no longer in control. After Paul Curry's arrest, prosecutor Brahim Bayai faced an uphill battle, proving his guilt in court. Despite the extensive evidence painstakingly gathered by investigators, the case still lacked the smoking gun. No syringe to directly tie Curry to the lethal dose of nicotine, and no eyewitnesses to testify that he had poisoned Linda. The courtroom became a chessboard where every move counted. Bayai meticulously laid out the circumstantial evidence, piece by piece, like a master strategist. The lethal level of nicotine found in Linda's body was presented as irrefutable proof of foul play. Expert testimony, including that of Dr. Neil Benowitz, emphasized how the dose could only have been administered through injection, and how quickly it would have acted. The detail of the puncture mark behind Linda's ear became a cornerstone of the case, a silent witness to her suffering. Yet, the defense was equally calculated. Curry's attorneys argued that there was no direct evidence linking him to Linda's death. They painted him as a grieving husband, bewildered by the tragedy. They questioned the validity of the forensic findings and suggested alternative explanations for the nicotine, including a bizarre claim that Linda might have accidentally ingested it herself through unconventional means. Bayai countered with the undeniable fact. On the night Linda died, Paul was the only person with her. He highlighted Curry's motive: greed. The life insurance policies, the rapid claim on payouts, and Curry's financial benefit were all laid bare for the jury to consider. The prosecution portrayed Curry as a man who meticulously planned every step, using his intelligence not to nurture love, but to manipulate and destroy for profit. To drive the point home, Bayai played the old police recordings of Linda's own words. In her hospital bed, weak but lucid, she had expressed suspicion about her husband. "If someone's trying to harm me, it has to be Paul," she had said. Her voice echoed through the courtroom like a haunting plea from the past, a chilling reminder of her untimely end. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that while the case was circumstantial, the weight of the evidence painted a grim and undeniable picture. It wasn't just about the lack of direct proof. It was about the totality of Curry's actions, his lies, and his chilling indifference. For the jury, the question became not whether there was a smoking gun, but whether the intricate web of deception woven by Curry left any room for doubt. However, Bayai knew he possessed a powerful weapon, circumstantial evidence that, when pieced together, painted a vivid and undeniable picture. This was not a case of one glaring piece of evidence, but rather a tapestry of clues that all pointed to one man. Motive. Paul Curry stood to gain significant financial benefits from Linda's death. The life insurance payouts, which totaled nearly $500,000, were a glaring red flag. Add to this her pension, which he began collecting monthly, and the proceeds from selling her cherished home, and the monetary motive was as clear as day. Bayai highlighted how these financial gains coincided perfectly with Curry's calculated actions before and after Linda's death. He had carefully ensured that every detail, from the insurance policies to the swift disposal of her assets, would work in his favor. The injection mark. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence was the small, unassuming mark found behind Linda's ear. Experts concluded that the high concentration of nicotine in her system could not have been accidental or ingested. It was almost certainly injected. This single puncture wound became a damning detail, a physical testament to a sinister act. Bayai emphasized that such a precise and methodical delivery of poison could only have been carried out by someone with forethought and a cold, calculating mind. By connecting these dots, Bayai told a story of premeditation and greed. It wasn't a hasty act of desperation. It was a meticulously crafted crime, one that Curry believed would never be uncovered. But the prosecutor's argument turned these circumstantial fragments into an unshakable narrative, leaving the jury to grapple with the chilling realization of just how deliberate this act of betrayal had been. Paul's behavior. His insistence on securing life insurance policies, his odd behavior during Linda's illness, and his actions following her death raised significant suspicion. Linda's interview records. In her own words, Linda stated that Paul was the only person who could have poisoned her. Bayai's case. Prosecutor Bayai argued that Paul was the only one present on the night of Linda's death and had a clear motive to benefit from her demise. The trial began in September 2014, 20 years after Linda's death. Paul Curry was charged with first-degree murder for financial gain, a conviction that carried a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. The prosecutor opened by giving the jury a detailed account of Linda's life and her relationship with Paul. He described how Paul used his charm and intelligence to win her trust, only to manipulate that trust for his own gain. Bayai presented evidence, including toxicology reports, witness testimonies from Linda's friends, and Linda's own recorded words from a year before her death. "This man is not the caring husband he pretended to be," Bayai stated in his opening remarks. "He is a calculating killer who used his wife as a means to enrich himself." The defense, on their part, attempted to frame Linda's death as an accident. They argued that she might have accidentally received a lethal dose of nicotine through unconventional treatment methods. Paul's attorneys even suggested that Linda could have administered the nicotine herself, though no evidence supported this claim. Dr. Neil Benowitz, a leading expert on nicotine, confirmed that the dose found in Linda's body could only have been administered via injection, and that death would have occurred within 20 to 30 minutes afterward. He also ruled out the possibility of accidental nicotine exposure. Audio recordings of Linda's interviews became a pivotal moment in the trial. The jury heard her voice expressing doubts about Paul, stating that he was the only one who could have poisoned her. The prosecutor presented documents to the jury, proving that Paul received hundreds of thousands of dollars after Linda's death. He also highlighted Paul's suspicious behavior in handling his late wife's financial assets. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations. For a day and a half, they reviewed the evidence presented, as tension in the courtroom steadily grew. Linda's friends, who had attended every session, held hands tightly, bracing for the verdict. Finally, the judge spoke. "We, the jury, find Paul Curry guilty of first-degree murder for financial gain." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the courtroom. This was the moment Linda's friends had waited 20 long years for. Paul Curry was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Linda's friends and family, it was a day of justice, but also one of profound sorrow. "We lost her to someone she trusted the most," said her friend Mary Siebold. "But now, she can finally rest in peace." This case became a testament to how the truth can emerge, even after decades, when there are people determined to fight for it until the very end. After the trial, Linda's friends made a decision to honor her memory. They established a foundation in her name to support women trapped in dangerous or manipulative relationships. This foundation became not only a tribute to Linda, but also a lifeline to help others avoid her fate. Her friend Mary Siebold reflected, "Linda was a bright light. She deserved love, but her trust was betrayed. Now, we want her story to be a lesson for others. She believed in love, and that belief cost her her life. But her light will never fade," said Frankie Thorber at a memorial evening held in Linda's honor. This story leaves us with a bitter realization of how far some are willing to go for personal gain, and a poignant reminder of the importance of pursuing justice, no matter how long it takes. Linda Curry is no longer with us, but her story will endure, to warn, inspire, and protect others. Why did Paul Curry remain unpunished for so many years, even though his guilt seemed so obvious? In my opinion, several factors played a role here. First and foremost, time. In the 90s, investigative methods and forensic science were vastly different from what we have today. Many of the technologies that are now considered standard were just beginning to develop. The lack of direct evidence, such as the syringe or records of nicotine purchases, made the prosecution incredibly difficult. Secondly, I believe Paul was truly a master manipulator. Not a genius, but a person who understood perfectly how to convince others of his innocence. He used his charisma and intellect to craft the image of a loving husband, lulling the police, Linda's friends, and even Linda herself into a false sense of security. He knew exactly how to confuse people and conceal his true motives. And of course, an important factor was that no one was prepared for such a method of murder. Nicotine as a weapon was something completely unheard of, especially back then. Perhaps it was this uniqueness that allowed Paul to evade suspicion in the early years after Linda's death. The novelty of it, combined with the lack of clear evidence, created the perfect storm for him to slip through the cracks of the investigation. But you know what amazes me the most? It's the persistence of those who didn't give up. Even after years, they believed that the truth had to come to light. And that's inspiring. For me, this story is a reminder that even when evil seems to have triumphed, justice can still prevail, even if it takes decades. How far can a person go for money? The story of Paul and Linda Curry makes us think about the limits of human greed and manipulation. Why do people often ignore warning signs? Perhaps it's out of love, fear, or unwillingness to face the truth. What do you think motivates people like Paul? And how would you act if you noticed something strange in the behavior of a loved one? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could be very insightful. And most importantly, as always, see you in the next videos.